Hey, we are on finally. So, my apologies to those of you who are still patiently waiting. I had to restart the computer here, and I was joking with Adam as I was getting more and more pissed. I don't know what it is about. I don't know what it is about me and technology, but the word technical is in my title. It honestly is, but they should change that because me and technical stuff just it's oil and water. Bad medicine. So anyway, thanks for hanging with us here a bit. We'll probably go a little late because we're starting a little late, but we got a list of things we want to get through today. You can see some stuff on the board there behind me. I don't know if I'm going to use the board for anything, so we'll just get going here. We wanted to talk about some upcoming field days, a field day that Adam and I just attended, kind of do some updates on what we're seeing in the crops. I got some pictures I want to show, talk a little bit about yield prospects, and as always, hopefully answer your questions. So those of you who remain with us through the delay, or maybe join as we're going here, feel free to put stuff in the chat. I got Adam here with me today to monitor the chat, and Adam's actually going to contribute some to some of the discussion as he always does. But in particular today, we're talking about red crown rot, and red crown rot is a new disease in soybeans that thankfully most of you have never seen, and hopefully it stays that way. But the epicenter of red crown rot in Illinois is in parts of Adam's territory. So Adam and Chris Carlisle have worked probably as much with red crown rot as anybody I know. Chris has actually got some trials out this year that we're starting to get some symptomology in, and I'm going to try to take some ratings. And it's such a new disease that really don't know much about how to control it, how to prevent it, what varieties are worse. My suspicion is it's much like tar spot or crown rot. Everything is susceptible to it, but there's probably varying degrees of susceptibility. But it's really not a disease that anybody has screened germplasm for. And so that's some of the work that Chris has started, is to just look at a bunch of beans at sites where we've had a history of red crown rot and just see how big of a difference there is. Is there a teeny tiny insignificant difference between susceptibility and beans, or is there a big enough to matter difference in susceptibility to beans? So when we get to that, I'm gonna kick that over to Adam to kind of lead that discussion. And just so I don't forget, I want to update you on a field day opportunity. So those of you that are kind of in, within traveling distance of Peoria, we have what we call a focus site. You'd call it a research farm near Roanoke, which is just northeast of Peoria, a little ways, not hard to get to at all. And on August 22nd, which is that a Thursday, Adam?
It is
Thursday. So Thursday, August 22nd, we're having our annual open house there at the Roanoke focus site. Going to have a lot of really good speakers there, and it's kind of an interesting format. Be quite honest with you, I gave them some feedback. I didn't like the format, but I'm not in charge of it, so they went with it anyway. The open house setting is there's going to be stations that you can stop and talk to researchers and technical experts, and you can kind of float through and you kind of come and go as you please. And there's going to be a lunch. So what generally happens is, in my experience with field days like that, is a lot of people show up for lunch. So if you want to just show up for lunch, you can do that. But if you want to show up and learn something, you can be there anytime really between 9 and lunch. And we're not gonna herd you through. We're not gonna put you in a group and you're stuck with your group through 5 different stations. You've been to field days like that. They like the open house setting more. So if you don't like being stuck in a group and you got to stay with that group as you rotate through stations, you might like this format better. And we'll have there's about 10 different stations will be set up. They'll have researchers there from the site. There's some folks coming. So Sean Evans, who is our agronomy lead for our region, he's going to be there talking pipeline. We're going to have Matt Goddard there, who is was a chemistry product manager for us, is now the Asgrow soybean product manager. He will be there talking on some topics as well as some other technical experts. So hopefully the weather on August 22nd is a lot like the weather today, and you can enjoy a beautiful field day. This weather is something else, and the longer it stays like this, the happier I am, and the happier corn is as well. So we'll talk a little bit about what's driving yield from here on out, and the benefits of a long, slow grain fill period, as opposed to a rush through it fast grain fill period. But anyway, just wanted to get that field day on your radar for August 22nd at Roanoke. So another field day that Adam and I were just at, along with a lot of other bear folks and a lot of other industry folks. What they have? Probably 200 people-ish, probably.
I think ended up being like 170, 80, something
Okay,
like that.
all right. So at the crop physiology field day at U of I that Dr. Belo puts on, this was his third, right? So third annual. Gets better every year, in my opinion. They had to show some agility this year with some lightning and thunderstorms, and I felt bad for them because they had everything all set up, ready to go, and last minute, about 2 hours before the event was supposed to start in the morning, looked like the weather was not going to cooperate. So they literally moved everything to a nearby farm shop building there at the university and got most people inside. Some people were seated in chairs kind of outside the door. And as it turned out, the rain cleared just in time. They probably could have done it in the tent where they were set up with before, but how's the saying go? Out of an abundance of caution, they decided to move it indoors, and they had a lot of different speakers. So there's the agenda for the field day there. And one thing that Dr. Belo does that Adam and I both love is he really gets his students involved in talking about the work that they in fact are doing. And he always gives them credit for the fact that they're the ones that are doing the work. He's kind of the face of the program, but the students led most of the discussions. I had really good conversations, good lunch, and you really shouldn't necessarily be promoting a field day a week after it happened, because you can't go to it now. But I wish you'd have been there, because it was really good. They did a fascinating, probably the best study I've ever seen on phantom yield loss, and they'll be sharing those results. They're repeating that study again this year. Spoiler alert, what their data shows is yield loss is real, but there is no phantom, which is frankly kind of what I've always, my biased opinion has been. But it's nice to have some data to back that up. So they did a really, really good study. It'll be available on their website eventually, I'm sure. They had conversations on herbicide, weed resistance, and herbicide management. They've got a student working in their crop physiology, not weed science, but they've got a weed scientist who is getting his master's in crop physiology. That's part of their program this year. They talked about what we, and a little bit like what we talked about 2 weeks ago here on Ask the Agronomist, is what's driving yield. How do you calculate yield? What is impacting yield? Had a really good talk on roots. One of their students is really focused on roots, looking at different root structures of hybrids, and making some inferences about how to manage those hybrids based on their root structure. And I tip my hat to that particular student, because working with roots is one of the most difficult things you can do in the crop science world. And there's not a lot of people working with roots because, frankly, it's too damn much work. And so most people just kind of ignore roots. They talked a lot about their MIP trials, their management response trials, and the young woman who's managing that work had a good presentation. They talked a lot about equipment, so they're big on fertilizer placement. I know this is something that Adam likes to talk about as well. He was the equipment guy for Dr. Belo back in the day, and when Dr. Belo was getting his program started, Adam was his equipment guy, and the equipment that they've got to do the trial work that they do. They've invented a lot of things. They've had a lot of things customized for them. They've kind of had to create a lot of stuff to enable them to do the work that they're doing. But they're very focused on fertilizer placement, different methods of banding, different forms of fertilizer. They're really big on. They think one of the keys to driving yields higher in a sustainable way is to place the fertilizer more timely, closer to the root. They've also done a lot of good work that shows as your plant population increases, your root mass decreases. And so you've got more plants with smaller roots trying to achieve more yield, but they've got a lesser root system to take that yield up with. And one thing I thought was interesting, regardless of what your population is, when you calculate the size of the root mass and you weigh the root mass, and they've developed some methods for actually measuring the root mass, the amount of root mass per acre in corn is fairly constant, which I found interesting. As you plant thicker, you have a smaller root mass per plant, but the total root mass in the field doesn't change much. But the roots attached to each plant are exploring less soil because it's a smaller root mass, because roots don't like competition from other plants. Corn roots don't really grow into each other. They avoid each other. And so as you crowd those plants closer together in the row, that root system is being crowded, and so it pulls in and gets smaller. That's one of the reasons Dr. Belo is such a fan of 20-inch row corn, because that gives each plant's root mass a little more room. And they have some really, really good work on that. And you can go to their website and see a lot of this stuff that they've got posted. They talked about soil fertilizer movement through the profile. They talked about a lot about biologicals and stock degradation and getting your stocks recycled and managing stocks. And then they had a farmer and a high yield farmer panel there with one addition. They had the current NCGA record hold grower for the state of Illinois, Troy Uphoff, DeKalb customer, by the way. Thank you, Troy. And another grower from I think from the Effingham area. I didn't know the other gentleman. I can't remember his name. That's bad form of me to not call out his name, but he kind of positioned himself. And this is his words, not mine. Troy was our high management grower. The other guy was kind of the normal management grower. And then they threw in a mediocre agronomist just for kicks to round out the panel. And that got to be me. So that was fun. And so we answered questions from the crowd and from Dr. Sybil and Dr. Belo, and that was a lot of fun. And I think Troy's pretty excited about his NCGA entry for this year, and I know a lot of you are pretty excited about what your corn's going to yield. I have talked to a few people here lately that thought they were excited, and then when they went in the field, they got a little less excited because it didn't look as good in the field as it did from the road, and they've heard other people talking about. So that's pretty normal, right? I don't know that I've ever walked into a field that looked as good inside as it did from the road. They always get a little more real when you get in there. And we're seeing some variability in ear size. Some people are seeing more tip back than they like. Some people think they're seeing pollination issues. It's a good crop. Some people have a phenomenal crop. The quote unquote disappointing stuff is probably 240 corn instead of 280 corn. So there's a lot of good corn out there, but I don't know that everybody's going to have a a field that's going to rival an NCGA field. Speaking of yield contests, good point to remind you about yield chasers. So we're continuing our yield chaser program. We have actually gone to 3 regions across West Central Illinois this year. So we're going to have kind of a north, central, south of the West Central part of the state. So West Central is not a big part of the state, but we're going to further subdivide West Central into 3 regions, and each of those regions, entrants in those regions will be competing against each other within that region. Now, we still have not gotten as sophisticated as NCGA, so it doesn't matter if you're a no-tiller, a strip tiller, a conventional tiller, or whatever you want to call yourself tiller. We don't even separate out irrigated ground, which we probably need to do that. But we're still trying to grow this thing, and if we get up to 2,000 entries someday, we'll have more categories. But we're not up to 2,000 entries yet, and we'd like to get there. So talk to your local FSR, talk to your dealer. Going to be lots of good corn and soybeans this year. Our contest is more for fun. There are prizes, so we do have some skin in the game. But that's one of the reasons that we don't worry too much about how you're raising your crop, or you're irrigated or you're not. This isn't a life or death thing. It's just for fun. It's to celebrate people that are raising really good crops. We'll have a good banquet and hopefully a good meeting with some good speakers in February, right, Adam?
Yep.
Early February. I don't remember the date. You want to look that up real quick, but early February sometime. I think that's going to be in the Peoria area this year, right? Yep. Yeah. So we'll be back in Peoria this year. We were in Peoria 2 years ago. We were in the Springfield area last year. Adam's looking for a date. If he finds it, I'll tell you what it is. But you can. The main thing is not the banquet. The main thing is to figure out what field you're going to enter, get it entered. And we are also, one change for this year, we're going to ask you a few questions about how you've managed your field, not because we're trying to be too intrusive. We just want to understand what are some of the common practices. NCGA does this as well. What was your planting date? What was your population? How much nitrogen did you use? How many times did you apply nitrogen? How did you apply nitrogen? Did you use fungicide? If so, how many times and when? Those sort of basic things that we can glean some information from. We're not going to share with everybody else, what you did on your farm. We would just like to know, generally speaking, what sort of practices are people that are having success doing, and if you're doing something that is top secret, that is getting you an extra 50 bushel, and you don't want anybody else to know, you don't have to tell us. But we would like to know how you've achieved the good yields that you're achieving, and so that's something else we're going to try to start doing this year. And so part of the entry process, and we don't want to make the entry process difficult enough that you choose not to enter, but expect to be asked some questions about your cropping practices on your contest field this year.
On the 5th.
5th, okay.
I thought it was the 5th, but
February 5th has been confirmed. So you can, and even if you think somebody's going to have 348 bushel corn, and the best you're going to do is 260, and you think, well, what's the point in entering if I know I'm going to lose by 80 bushel? Well, 260 corn's really good. I would like to raise some 260 corn. We will celebrate the fact that you raised 260 bushel corn. You get to come to the banquet. You get a good steak. We have a good meeting. We have some fun.
Pretty sure you get an entry prize as well, just for putting an entry in.
Oh, now that's nice. That's nice. So we're actually
typically a really nice sweatshirt.
It's sounds a little bit like bribery, but call it what you want. So as Adam pointed out, that there's something for everybody. Even if your yield's so low that I beat you, you still get something just for participating. in addition to a really good steak.
Not for coming to the meeting, but for putting an entry in.
I'll be okay. So good clarification. So if you show up just for the steak, but you didn't put an entry in, no prize.
I believe that's correct.
So,
I will confirm that with Jennifer and Zach. But
okay.
my understanding is if you put a yield chaser entry in,
that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm not going to give you a sweatshirt just because you ate one of our steaks. You know, that's ridiculous. But and I feel I gotta give Jennifer a shout out. She and her and Zach both do a ton of work on yield chasers, and I know Jennifer's watching. And when I'm talking about her baby and I'm saying things in a weird way or saying the wrong thing or giving out misinformation, she's just sitting there screaming, "No, that's not right. That's not right. You stupid agronomist." So anyway, that's our yield chaser. We'll talk more about that. Oh, and I will also do a little name dropping here. I mentioned Dr. Bilo with his field day. He was very appreciative. I was blessed to be asked to be part of his panel. Had a lot of fun. He actually thought he owed me a favor because I agreed to participate in the panel, which he does not owe me any favors. I was happy and proud to do it. But the fact that he thinks he owes me a favor, he actually brought up being on here again with us at the end of the year. So we're going to kind of quietly announce that we will have Dr. Bilo on with us again in December, whenever our final episode ends up being. Sometimes we move the date, sometimes we move the time. We got to, when you got a famous star co-host like Dr. Bilo, you gotta be flexible. And we're working around finals and other things, other responsibilities he's got. So I actually, to be honest with you, I hope he doesn't see this. I wasn't gonna impose on him because he's done it with us the last 2 years. And I wasn't sure he liked doing it. And so I wasn't going to ask again because I feel like we're risking wearing out our welcome. And both Adam and I have a lot of history with Dr. Bilo and love the relationship we have with him. But we don't want to abuse that too much. But anyway, when he brought it up, I was like, yeah, good deal. So that looking forward to that. That'll be after harvest. That'll be a long ways away from now. So let's get into some agronomy. We've probably been talking too much about other stuff. Sometimes, it's like when Russ used to talk about football or golf and people would complain about just stick to the important stuff. Sometimes people think we talk about too many things other than agronomy. So I want to get some pictures here, talk about some of the stuff that we've been seeing. Adam sent me a picture that this is one of my biggest pet peeves. You've probably got your own pet peeves, but so one of mine and most agronomists. So don't be that guy that sends me that picture and the text says, "What's that?" Because that makes me want to throw my phone when you do that. Because Adam and I were adding it up. So between it's probably SDS. Whoops. You were probably suspicious that was SDS when you sent the picture.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 in Central Illinois, that's SDS. But it could be brown stem rot. It could be stem canker. It could be a little too much of a really good fungicide. It could be red crown rot, which Adam's going to talk about in a bit. Sometimes even if you catch it just the right stage, white mold can even look a little bit like that. So there's lots of things that could be, and you can't tell by looking at the leaf. You got to split stems. You got to look for other symptomology. And I get it. It's hard to take a picture of the whole plant that you can see, but do your people a favor. Don't send them that picture and ask them what that is, because they're either going to say, "Well, we can't tell what that is," or they're going to assume it's SDS and tell you it's SDS, and you could have done that yourself. So you got to look at other parts of the plant. Okay, so I see Merle's question there. I would say pod count looks really good generally to me. Merle's question was, if you didn't see it there in the chat, what what are we seeing for pod count this year? I'm seeing a lot of beans with some nice branches, a lot of nodes, pretty good pod counts. And when I say by pretty good, Merle, I haven't actually counted a lot of pods, because when you look at the plant and go, shit, that's a lot of pods, I don't want to count all those. There's a lot there. If you can count them easily, that's bad. If you get to like 80 and you're getting tired of counting and there's quite a few more left there, that's a good sign. I was going to show you a picture of a bean plant that I took yesterday or a couple days ago. Doggone it, where is there it is. And not every variety does this. This particular variety is known for this. So look at that. Look at that cluster at the top of that plant. And Dr. Belo talked about, if you could add one more pod, that's about, depending on your population and seed size, that's about 2 bushel. And that plant's trying to add about 10 more pods right there at the top. Now those aren't all going to fill. Some of those might have 1 bean in them. You're not going to have 15 4-bean pods in a cluster right at the top of a bean, but that's cool. That plant's already got lots of pods on it, already got lots of nodes on it, and it's got a real nice cluster there at the top. That's we don't get commercial here on Ask the Agronomist very often, but that's 27XF3, by the way. Maybe you've heard of it. So I think if white mold and SDS do not derail your bean crop, and we stay moist through August and beans stay healthy, what typically ruins yield of soybeans is disease. Beans that don't stay healthy all the way through, that die early, usually disease is what trims our yield of soybeans. And, we are seeing some white mold. We are seeing some sudden death. You can't have the amount of moisture that we've had through this growing season and expect not to see some sudden death. So don't panic if you're seeing sudden death, because it's a high yield bean disease. If we don't see any sudden death, we're probably not going to have a great bean crop, because that probably means it's been dry. So high yield environments, good soils, and lots of moisture are what SDS loves. And so we've had a lot of that. So we'll, I would expect to see some sudden death. And even if you used a seed treatment, like, good time to remind people, seed treatments do not prevent SDS. They lessen the severity of SDS. Planting a resistant variety does not prevent SDS. It lessens the severity of SDS. I have seen fields of a resistant bean with an SDS seed treatment and awful SDS. But it would have been awful had you not done those things. So don't get your expectations too high for your seed treatment to prevent SDS, because you're still going to have SDS even if you used a seed treatment. While we're on the soybean disease topic, so Adam, why don't you kind of give people a Cliff Notes version of what red crown rot is? You can come around here and get on TV if you want.
Sure.
Sometimes people say they can't hear you when you're not on a microphone.
Yeah, so red crown rot's not a new disease. It's been around in the South, deep South, for quite a while.
In peanuts, right?
Peanuts, yeah. So they've been struggling with it down south for quite a while, but there's been a prevalence of it showing up here in the Midwest more recently. In Pike County, which is a county in my territory, has been a real epicenter for it. It's been showing up there a lot. I think Tim Lashmet, and who works for us now, he found some of it 3 or 4 years ago now. I can't remember exactly. in a couple of customers' fields, and it's kind of a nasty disease. As Lance said, a lot of times its symptoms are very, very similar to that of SDS as far as the toxins that get translocated from the lower part of the plant. They end up in the leaf tissue and therefore cause similar issues or similar symptoms as what SDS does. The differentiating factor often when you're out looking at your field, which you have to go out there, as Lance said, and go look at the plants, there are these little red pustules at the bottom called perithecia, actually, and that's where it gets part of its name is red crown rot. They're down at the bottom of the base of the plant, near the crown of the plant, and it's red. So that's why it's called red crown rot and referred to as red crown rot. It overwinters in some really hardy little fruiting bodies that makes it difficult to get rid of. So when you have it, you're not going to get rid of it. It's going to be around for quite some time. There's a lot of research going on right now trying to figure out what we can do. As Lance mentioned, we've got some studies going on where we're trying to screen not only our germplasm, we're looking at some other germplasm that we put in there as well. And we've also got some different seed treatment concoctions in there to see if anything has a lot of efficacy on it. There are a couple of products on the market that are labeled for suppression of red crown rot, not control of it. So it's becoming a pretty scary problem, especially for some people that have really, really bad situations in certain fields of it, because where it is at, it is extremely aggressive and detrimental to the plants that it infects, lowering yields substantially. It likes situations where beans.
So in those scenarios, the relatively little yield is coming from the infected plants. And if the field ends up making 30 bushel, it was because half of the plants in the field were not infected. And that's where most of the yield's coming from.
Correct. Yeah. Usually it tends to be very patchy with its pattern of infection. It's not, the whole field is infected a little bit. It's, as Lance said, certain areas are really, really hurt badly on their yield and the rest of the field isn't. So guys are doing everything they can as far as trying to avoid red crown rot infection. Things like planting into dry soils, planting later is helpful when things are a little warmer and a little drier, maybe. Doing everything they can as far as drainage is concerned. And, we're trying to learn more about maybe some more resistant varieties to try and help plant, as well as crop rotation would be another thing. Try to plant more corn instead of corn soybean rotation, and especially not a soybean after soybean would be highly regarded as a bad management practice. So we've seen it showing up again this year. We're seeing it start to show up in some fields that it hasn't been in before. Another management practice that a few guys are doing is they're trying to wait till last to harvest those fields so that they're not spreading the disease via equipment. They're waiting till the end of their tillage season to try and do the tillage, if they're doing anything on those fields for tillage, and then washing their equipment so that they're not spreading the disease that way, because it is a soil-borne disease. But yeah, it's getting a lot of attention more and more all the time, because it is being extremely destructive where it is found, and it's not going to go away, unfortunately. So, but yeah, if you're, and it has been found in other areas of the state. I can't remember how many counties now. I should have updated myself on that, but it's been found in other counties throughout the state of Illinois. So it's not a Pike County only problem. So if you're riding around and you're looking at your fields and you think you see some interveinal chlorosis similar to SDS, call somebody to come out there and take a look at it. Go out there and look at it yourself to make sure that you don't have a red crown rot problem, because I highly recommend trying to determine whether you've got a red crown rot problem showing up in your field versus SDS or brown stem rot or any of the other things that the symptomology is very similar of. Yeah. So
everything else is already everywhere.
Right.
So that doesn't make that much difference. But
right.
If it's red crown rot, you might want to treat that differently.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, Adam, for that update. And as you all can see, Adam could do this without me, so we're blessed to have him on the team. So we've touched on some of the soybean diseases we've been seeing, and actually, I think so far, I think soybean diseases may end up being a little bit bigger deal this year than corn diseases are. So obviously, we've been on pins and needles for about 6 weeks now, expecting tar spot to be a big hairy deal, and it's still hard to find tar spot in most of Illinois. You can find it if you look. It is getting easier to find by the week, but I'm shocked at how little tar spot we have with the weather conditions that we've had for a lot of this growing season. And the early planted corn is far enough along that it would be really difficult for any disease to take a lot of yield from it. The only disease that could probably get bad fast enough to take much yield from it, I think, would be crown rot. And that is not as likely to happen with the low stress levels that we're experiencing now in the crop. So for crown rot to be a big deal, you got to plant early, you got to be on the right soil, you got to have plenty of moisture early, you got to get that crown rot infection in that plant. And then what you really need to make it really bad is you really have to have stress during grain fill. And you go through some drought stress during grain fill, you get some of those hot nights where it's still 82 degrees at 10 o'clock at night and it's 74 at 6 in the morning. You combine a few of those nights with some drought stress and some foliar leaf diseases and some other things going on. That's where crown rot can really knock the knees out from under a corn crop. And we could still see that happen. I hope we don't, but we've had years in the past where middle of August things looked phenomenal. By the end of August, it was apparent that there were problems that we did not know about. So we could still, have some of that, and I'm sure we'll have a little bit of that. But every day that we get closer to black layer is one less day that diseases have to negatively impact our yield. So one corn disease that a little bit like red crown rot. It's interesting because it's new. I will show some pictures of here because it's kind of photogenic. Is a disease called bacterial leaf streak, and it's not really new. It's existed in the West for several years. So when you look at it, just looking at the leaf, looks a lot like gray leaf spot, right? Now, if you look closely at those lesions, you can see the margins are not as straight as gray leaf spot. And if you look up into the sky with the sun as a backlight, they kind of glow a little bit yellow, I guess is the way I would describe that. And that they've got kind of a translucent look to them. They're letting some of that sunlight through. Gray leaf spot does not do that. It's not going to let the light through, so it's not going to have that yellow cast to it. And if you were paying attention, you heard the word bacterial in the name. So Adam, what's a fungicide going to do to a bacteria?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. So what fungicide you used or didn't use has got nothing to do with your bacterial leaf streak. We are seeing hybrid differences. Hybrid differences exist to everything. Hybrids have not been well characterized for bacterial leaf streaks, so we'll kind of learn as we go. It is not known to impact yield in the West. We used to say that about tar spot as well. So who knows whether this thing will be impacting yield or not. It's also fairly common for bacterial diseases to need a wound of some kind to infect. This one does not appear to need a wound. If you've got wounds, you might get more infection, but I don't think we necessarily had to have a windstorm, had to have hail, had to have insect feeding. I don't know that we have to have a wound to get infection. So if you see something that looks a little like gray leaf spot, but yet it doesn't quite look like gray leaf spot, and it looks a little bit like those pictures I just showed, let somebody know, because it might be bacterial leaf streak. And just like if you think it's red crown rot and it turns out to be SDS, well, that's not particularly interesting, because SDS has been everywhere for a long time. And if what you thought maybe was bacterial leaf streak turns out to be gray leaf spot, it's not good for your corn, but it's not particularly interesting either. But if it is bacterial leaf streak, it would be good to figure out, where we're seeing that, and what severity and what hybrid, so we can try to learn from that. So always something, as you guys know. New things every year, new problems every year. Every year is different. That, we say that every year. It's true every year, and that's never going to change. One thing I wanted to show. So these are that's one of 10 plants that I marked when they were about that stage with a numbered stake. So you can see that's number 6 there. So that's one of 10. Those plants were all hit by stink bugs. That's just in a plot at Monmouth, and it was not a stink bug plot, but I kind of turned it into one. And I've been watching these plants through the growing season, and periodically taking pictures of these plants. And we're going to look at the ears on these plants to see what kind of impact stink bug is having. That's plant 7 there, was not as damaged as plant 6. But we're seeing now plant 9 there. And you can see that the damage from stink bug is twofold. And I don't know that we really know how much of an impact the toxin that the stink bug puts into the plant is having, as far as the stunting and the malformation, or is it just the physical damage? Obviously, when they're feeding, if they happen to nick the growing point, the plant turns into a weed. But even if they don't nick the growing point, these plants don't grow right. They're stunted, they're set back, and I wanted to see what impact we had on yield. Oh, this is a fun one. I'm distracting myself here. What's that look like to you? That is a soft maple, or silver maple, growing on the riverbanks of the Spoon River. I was mowing some CRP, and I look out in the window of my tractor cab, and I see the leaves, and so I took that picture through the window. And so I text out to some of my agronomy buddies. I said, look at that. Looks like there's tar spot in the maple trees. And Jim Donnelly, a colleague of mine that knows as much about tar spot as anybody, his reply was, yeah, tar spot of maple, which Jim's a notorious smartass. And so I'm not falling for it. I'm thinking, yeah, right, Donnelly. You're like synonymous with tar spot. So of course this is tar spot of maple. So I kept mowing, not wanting to, and I didn't know. And so I Googled it. I'll be damned. That's a real thing, tar spot of maple. So it's different genus, different species, but much like tar spot in corn, it does the same thing to maple trees. They aren't hurt as much by it as corn is hurt by tar spot, but there is tar spot of maple. So my sarcastic, smart-ass friend Jim was shooting me straight. So who knew? Let's see. Where's the picture I'm looking for? We'll get to aphids here in a minute. I'm getting through my aphid pictures. There. Okay. So you can't see the stake in that picture, but that is one of my 10 plants, and you can see that ear is okay, not great. There's another one that's really not great. That would be one of the more messed up plants. So So there is absolutely yield loss occurring from stink bug damage, and it can be 100%. I mean, the plants that they hit the growing point on turn into a little corn bush that's just a bunch of tillers that never makes an ear. This one got damaged enough that it's almost not making an ear, and every one of these plants has a smaller ear than neighboring plants that didn't have any stink bug damage. So I actually think there's some fields out there that have enough stink bug damage that, you know, we're probably losing 25 or 30 bushel of yield just from stink bug. And you combine that with a 20 or 30 bushel yield hit from aphids, and it's going to pull that field all the way down to 250. So I'm not saying there's going to be awful corn, but it's going to be less than it could have been because of some of these insect pests. And, you know, we don't normally expect insect, except maybe in a bad rootworm area. So in a bad rootworm environment, yeah, you maybe would expect an insect to be a yield limiting factor. But stink bugs and aphids probably were not on your radar screen of yield limiting factors at the beginning of the season. And so far, if disease pressure stays low, and knock on wood that it does, stink bugs and aphids are probably our biggest yield limiting factors in corn this year, which is kind of weird. But again, this has been a weird year, just like every year is weird. You know, years aren't weird because of climate change. Years are weird because that's just the way it works. Speaking of weird stuff, you know what that is? Kind of hard seeing that picture. So you can see the mushrooms growing in the green circle. So the white things are mushrooms, toadstools, basically. Not sure if they're edible or not. And then there's a darker green ring. Oops. That kind of follows like, ooh, that's hard to do backwards. That follows that way. So that's it. And that's not the best picture of the green ring. You'll see them in lawns. That's a fairy ring. That is a soil fungus. And I didn't make up that name either. That is a soil fungus that starts. So basically it starts in a spot like that. And then as the fungus grows in the soil, it expands outward. And where the fungus is active in the soil, and it grows at the same rate in all directions. And so you just keep getting a ring that over time keeps getting bigger, further out. And what the ring is, where the fungus is active in the soil, it's feeding on soil organic matter, releasing a bunch of nitrogen. And so your grass gets greener. And it's really not hurting anything other than you've got toadstools growing in your yard, and you got this goofy looking green ring that's making your yard look non-uniform. Now, if you over fertilize your whole yard, that might make the green ring a little less noticeable. If your yard's like mine and hasn't gotten any fertilizer from anything other than a dog in 40 years, you know, the green ring's pretty darn noticeable. So that's because of the moisture that we've had. So if you see those fairy rings growing in different lawns, that's what that is. So I've actually had a couple calls this week about what's the green ring and all the lawns, and people also didn't believe me when I told them it was fairy ring. They're like, yeah, right, Lance. What is it really? But that's what they call it. Let's see. So let's talk aphids. So we've been talking aphids all summer, it seems. Jennifer told me that Chris Callow's video on aphids is our most watched video of the year. It's ahead of all of my Ask the Agronomist videos. So very popular topic of conversation this year. There's been a lot of discussion about aphids. We've dedicated a couple episodes to them, and they were just flat bad in parts of the state this year. They were the most impactful in corn planted after Mother's Day. Something about the timing of development of that corn and the stage of growth of that corn, when they were looking for a place to go, when they were a winged female flying into the area looking for a place to have a family, they sought out that late planted corn. They sought out certain hybrids more than others as well. So most seed companies could probably tell you what their aphid magnets are. I'll tell you what our aphid magnets are. So it would be 6434, and any version of 34 would be a new hybrid 114.99 that most of you have not planted yet, and 66, 17, and 18, which a lot of you do plant. They like that one a little more as well. So those are the three that we have identified in our stable that sometimes will have more. Depends on planting date, depends on lots of other factors. So you can't just say that every acre of those hybrids is full of aphids, but generally those hybrids have more aphids in them than others. And we don't know exactly what it is, if it's the shape of the flag leaf and how it wraps around the tassel, or the leaf architecture at the top of the plant, or the color, or the food that the plant is providing to the aphid, that they just like it better. I don't know what it is about 6357 that coons like either, but they do. And aphids have a preference for certain hybrids as well. And I think in a lot of cases, people ignored aphids because they've never worried about them before. In some cases, we treated for them, but maybe 2 weeks later than we should have. In some cases, we treated for them, but with a product that was not probably the best aphid product that you could have used. And in some cases, we just kind of took out the ones at the top of the plant. Some cases, we got them all. Some cases, we got very little activity on them. So it was kind of all over the board. The population seems to have kind of naturally crashed in the last couple of weeks. I do not find gooey, sticky honeydew dripping off of plants, just swarming, crawling with green gooey aphids like I did a couple weeks ago. So whether you treat it or not, I think your aphid population is probably lower than it was at one point in time. But as you're walking fields, you'll be able to tell all summer which plants were covered with aphids. I mean, they've still got skin casts all over them. They've probably got black mold growing on the leaves. They've just got a very dark appearance. They got all kinds of crap stuck to them just because of that sticky honeydew. Anything that was blowing through the field or floating through the air is going to get stuck on that leaf. And if you look at the ears on those plants, you're going to tend to see a smaller ear. It's either going to be significantly tipped back, or in some severe cases, the entire ear shoot may have aborted. And it's not really interfering with pollination. It's not as much a pollination issue as it is a drain on the resources of the plant issue. And those plants that were covered with aphids were going through a hell worse than any drought they've ever experienced. If you imagine every one of those aphid plants is sucking, sugars, sap, nutrients, and water out of those corn plants, and basically feeding all those aphids did not leave enough resource in that plant to feed the ear. And if it's bad enough, it'll abort the entire ear. So some of these bad aphid plants are completely barren. Some of them will have half of an ear. Some of them will have 2/3 of an ear. Some of them will have 3/4 of an ear. So the yield loss on the heavily infested plants can be very significant. Kind of back to Adam's conversation on red crown rot. The plants with bad red crown rot don't amount to much. The field might be okay if only 1% of your field is infected with red crown rot. Same with aphids. If you lose 50% of the yield on 1% of your plants, big deal. But if you're losing 50% of the yield on 25% of your plants, well, that's adding up to real bushels. So it depends on the density how infested were those plants, and how, what percentage of the plants in the field were that heavily infested. A lot of times it's worse along the outside edge, and you walk out in the field, it's not as bad. If you can find aphids on plants, that's concerning, but finding some aphids on a plant is not that big a deal. But the ones that were just covered with aphids, I'll look for, if you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. So there would be a leaf that is pretty heavily infested with aphids. Now the whitish tan things, those are not aphids. The aphids are the round green critters on there. And I think I got another one here. And I showed this 2 weeks ago. So those black flies, those aren't flies, those are winged aphid females. So that's what every yellow sticky trap I've had out for 3 weeks in soybeans around here looks like. They are covered with winged aphids. And there's only winged aphids because, there's a good one there. And get the angle right here so you can, darn window glaring in it. But that plant, that's one of the plants that probably going to have half an ear at best. There's another one there. And that greasy, oily, see how shiny they are? They almost look like they've been shellacked. That's the honeydew. And that's what the aphids are excreting. Now, this was a field of May 20th planted corn. This field did get sprayed for aphids, but it got sprayed for aphids probably about 2 weeks after it should have. I think by the time it got done, there was probably still a reason to do it, but we'd already lost quite a bit of yield by that point in time. And you'll be able to see those bad aphid plants all year long. So if you're out walking cornfields now and you're finding barren plants, is that plant barren because it was an aphid plant? They are attracted sometimes to the runtier plants. So it's really hard to tell, is that plant a runt because of the aphids? Or were the aphids more attracted to it because it was a runt to begin with, and then they just made it worse? I would look at your basal stalk diameter. The aphids are not going to reduce the basal stalk diameter of that plant. And at the base, if that stalk is similar to the good plants in the field, I'm going to say that aphids were probably the primary reason why that plant has less of an ear or no ear. If that plant was obviously smaller, basal stalk diameter, it was probably a late emerging plant. It was probably a runt anyway. It was maybe going to be a barren plant anyway. And then the aphids just added to the situation. But, you could have small ears because of stink bug damage. You could have smaller ears because of aphids. You could have smaller ears because of compaction. There was a lot of planting windows this year that were, a 1-day planting window got stretched into a 3-day planting window, and 2 of the 3 days in that planting window weren't really in the window, but we planted anyway. That kind of stuff matters. And so in some cases you could have had plants that maybe were dealing with a restricted root system or compacted sidewall. Maybe they got set back a little bit. In some parts of the state, we got really dry in June before we got wet. And some places it was, dry longer than others, where we probably did stress things a little bit. Now, we learned last year that you can't ruin a crop by being dry in June. And if you get plenty of rain in July and August, you're going to have a pretty good crop, even if you were too dry in June. And that's the case this year as well. So, the places where people are disappointed in their corn, it's more of relative to expectations based on how it looked or what they've heard from other people. I mean, I got guys sending me yield checks that if it feels good and we get good kernel size to it, something that starts with a 3 is in reach. So, if you've got 240 corn and somebody else has got 280 corn, you're going to wonder where your other 40 bushel went. And some of these ear issues that we're seeing where we've got smaller ears or inconsistent ear size, that's going to take some of the top off. And certainly diseases can take some of the top off. We know the genetic yield potential of corn is north of 400 bushel. We know the genetic yield potential of soybeans is north of 100 bushel, but yet we don't really almost ever achieve those kind of yields because things are robbing from the top. And that happens every year. And even if you end up, raising a really, really good corn crop, maybe one of your best ever crops, something took yield off the top because your best ever corn crop didn't make 450. And that potential obviously is there because other people have done it in a more of a, more controlled environment. So I think I got through my list. Adam, what's 2 weeks from today?
22nd.
22nd. Okay, that'll be the day I get back from moving my baby to college. So it'll give me a day to recover from taking my youngest daughter out to Iowa State, and we'll be back with you on August 22nd, which will also be the Roanoke Field Day. So keep that in mind as well, and take that in if you can. If you're within driving distance of Roanoke, it would be well worth it. Good steak lunch there too. So the lunch is worth the drive. You know what it costs to eat at McDonald's today. It's worth driving to Roanoke to have a good steak on us. So with that, thanks for your attendance and questions, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. Everybody enjoy the weather.